Mr. Bishop. And for all the audience out here, we want you to show some sign here, represent everyone. Yeah.
Excellent.
And our topic for today is bilingualism and why we need to have bilingual programs, dual language programs for all of our students K through 12th grade. We have with us on our panel today three amazing faculty and co-workers who are here to talk about different areas. And we also have Mr. Benjamin Bishop here with us who will talk about linguistics as well. And our purpose today is figuring out why we need bilingualism from K through 12 school. After we get through with all of our speeches, we will therefore open our discussions up to the audience, our questions up to the audience, and then after that, that's it. So we'll start off with Mr. Robinson, Dr. Robinson, make sure you can hear us. We'll start off, this is our panel. This is, make sure you can see, make sure they can actually see. This right here is Miss Garner. She is an English teacher and she teaches 12th grade, 11th grade. This lovely young lady in the middle is Miss Crystal Johnson. She is our Algebra 1 teacher here at Fayetteville High School. And this is our 9th grade English teacher, Miss Morrow. She is going to talk about families with bilingualism, and she's also representing the 9th grade class, English 1. And we have Mr. Bishop here, Mr. Benjamin Bishop, who is standing with us today. Mr. Bishop is going, when he gives his presentation, he's also going to let us know about his field and why he thinks linguistics is very important. So we'll start off with Miss Garner. Miss Garner, take it away.
Okay. So I was charged with the two questions. What does it mean to be a bilingual teacher, and how can being bilingual help students speak better English and Spanish? So to start on the first one, what it means to be a bilingual teacher. For a general sense, it helps me as a teacher to have a deeper understanding and a sensitivity to culture and vocabulary and grammar as a whole that I wouldn't have had without knowing another language. Because knowing Spanish as well, it helps me to have even more vocabulary. I have a wider range of vocabulary than I would have if I only spoke English. And not only do I have a wider range, I have a wider range in another language, which is significant, especially when going to another country and trying to speak Spanish in another country. It helps me to be, in being a bilingual teacher, it helps me to have more things in common with more people. I have a broader range of people that I can have something in common with than if I only spoke English, because if I only spoke English, I can only speak to English speakers. But since I can speak Spanish, I have another wider range of people that I can find something in common with. So that gives me more opportunities to build relationships, and more opportunities specifically to build relationships with students who do speak Spanish, or who are learning English, or who are even learning Spanish on their own in classes, or learning another language, period. In understanding, in having that deeper understanding myself, it helps me to foster that love for another language and another culture in my students. Even today, I heard a student say, when he was hearing another student talk about the Korean that she's been learning, he said, if it ain't English, it ain't right. And so we know, as people who have gone through, the high school level Spanish or French classes that we had to take to meet the foreign language requirement, we know about other cultures. Well, he hasn't had that full exposure yet, so he hasn't had the opportunity to be exposed to other cultures or other languages in the same way that I have. And this was just a comment of ignorance. Surely he didn't mean it to offend, but without that opportunity to understand another culture, that's where I come in as the bilingual teacher, and I have the opportunity to foster that love that he didn't have before. And then another thing that it means for me to be a bilingual teacher is it means that I'm an expert in language acquisition, which puts me in an excellent position to teach language. So I'm not specifically teaching the language of English, but I'm teaching the structure of it, the grammatic standards for it, the literature for it. So I have a wider range than I would have if I was just teaching vocabulary at a basic level. But right now I get to teach in a way that I get to connect to different cultures, like I said before. So in teaching literature, I get to teach in a connection to Spanish literature, and I wouldn't have had that expertise without having taken Spanish classes throughout school and throughout college and all that. So with all that being said, while I'm an expert in language acquisition, I can see the point of view of the students who are learning, and maybe there's something that they don't understand. Well, chances are I've been through the exact same thing that they did, and it'll help me as a teacher to kind of finagle around that problem and help find the best way to teach them according to that problem, because chances are I've gone through the same thing that they did, that same roadblock in language. Just the other day, Okay. Then it also, I haven't had many opportunities with this in this school, but if I had the opportunity to, if we had more English language learners, I'd get to speak specifically to them. If there's something they didn't understand, I could speak directly to them in Spanish to clarify something that they didn't understand in English literature. So, like I said, we don't have opportunities like that in such a rural, small county. We don't have very many English language learners here. But if we did, I'd have more opportunities to do that. Now, how it can better students speaking of English and Spanish, one of the major things in learning a new language is the focus on grammar and vocabulary and sentence structure. You can't speak the language. You can't learn the language unless you're learning all of those aspects of it. And so with grammar, that's a huge, huge proponent of seeming like an educated individual, depending on whatever language you're talking about. So if I'm not speaking with correct grammar in English, chances are I'm not going to be understood, and I'll be seen as undereducated or ignorant. So with a student who's learning Spanish, they have to focus on grammar. They have to focus on that vocabulary. They have to notice those things. And so in noticing that in another language, they might be more prone to notice those things in English too. I know I did when I was learning Spanish. I had to focus on how the subject followed the verb, or the verb followed the subject, how things changed in Spanish grammar than how it did in English. And things are so different between the two. And I had to figure out how does it look for English compared to how it looks in Spanish. And with vocabulary, vocabulary in Spanish has Latin roots, Arabic roots, and so many different things like that. So in learning all of those vocabulary words in Spanish, all of the conjugations in Spanish focus on that Latin or Arabic root. And so if you don't understand what that root word means, you can't communicate your idea. And most language, if you have most vocabulary, you can get away with communicating in only vocabulary words with little to no grammar. It's broken, but people can still understand you with basic vocabulary. Students, if they understand the roots and they understand the root Latin word, it's going to look the exact same as it does in Spanish as it does in English. That same Latin word is the exact same. So if I take that same word that I looked at in English, and maybe I don't understand what that word means with the same root that I've already seen in Spanish, I can kind of figure it out by reading into what that root meant in another word, how it means the same thing in this one, and I can come to a better understanding of what the word means by context a little bit. But yeah.
No comprendo.
Lots of Spanish. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ms. Garner. Thank you very much. Thank you. We now turn it over to Ms. Johnson. She is a math teacher, and she's going to speak about state assessments and how bilingualism can actually apply to state assessments.
Our state mandated test here in the state of Tennessee is the 10 Ready course. 10 Ready is given in English, math, science, and social studies in grades 3 through 8. And in grades 9 through 11, it would be English 1, English 2, Algebra 1, Algebra 2, Geometry, U.S. History, and Biology. And I think I got on, and ACT, because we have to include ACT. One of the things that being bilingual would mean is that students would have a better, what we call, or what has been referred to as cognitive control. Students that are required to learn more than one language or have the opportunities to learn more than one language are much more able to switch between tasks more readily and more rapidly. Now, considering that our new state testing, I say new state testing, we're in our 3rd year of bumps and bruises, but in this current status that we're dealing with, there are multiple subparts on each and every subject. And while your K-8 subjects or your 3-8 subjects where they're mandated to test English, English has at least 3 subparts. The first subpart, of course, being a writing component, where they not only have to read and comprehend a text, but also cite that text within a response that they're required to give to respond to a specific prompt. One of the things that being bilingual would allow these students to do is to have a greater perspective. They would be able to not only take the culture like Miss, what's your name again? Miss Garner. It's been one of those days, I apologize. And I worked with her. We're on Jennifer floors though. That Miss Garner was saying is it gives them more cultural aspects that they can bring into and thus infuse into their responses. The ability to transfer between tasks and text would benefit them not only within the writing and the grammatical part of the English assessments, but also the mathematics tasks. And mathematics is one of our greatest weaknesses overall here in the state of Tennessee. And I can tell you about a half a bajillion reasons that I believe that to be a case, but nevertheless, regardless of the reasons behind it, it's a factual certainty currently where we are. So one of the things that would enable our students to do would be to more quickly switch between tasks. Think of something as easy or as simple as mundane as we would consider converting between fractions and decimals. It relates all back to what Ms. Garner was saying about the students being able to change and convert within their minds the grammatical structure. It's along the same lines. Having the vast experience and practice that being a bilingual student would afford our students would be that since they were so versed in translating back and forth between Spanish and English languages, would also make them more adept at changing between, say, fractions and decimals, which ultimately, just as the Latin root means the exact same thing in every language, fractions and decimals mean the same things, but there are numerous and countless times that I see our students, even as 9th graders, frustrated with a task as simple as converting between fractions and decimals. All of which, of course, is a major component of being able to be productive and successful citizens, no matter what field of study and expertise they choose to go into once they get beyond the realm of their regular K-12 education. Being bilingual, it just wires the brain so that they access so many more parts of it and enable them and afford them greater opportunities than what they currently have. It just opens so many doors. And once they see that and once they experience that within their classroom educational setting and within their community that they're serving as a whole, it in turn will reflect and show within their test scores.
Thank you very much, Ms. Johnson. Thank you very much. Excellent. Our next person is Miss Morrow. She's an English teacher. And Miss Morrow is going to talk about raising a child or raising a family that is bilingual.
So the questions I was given was to talk about what it's like in a family where two languages are spoken in our household. How are you rearing your children to be bilingual, and what are the benefits my children will have by being bilingual? So my husband, he's from Italy. He's from the great country of Italy, and apart from just amazing food, of course, and 70 pounds of weight gain, he brought second language into my home. So living in this bilingual home, like we're never dull. It's always a back and forth. We switch back and forth between our languages pretty frequently. In particular, it helped my husband because he can't survive in this country without English. So with us speaking in English in our household and then switching back into Italian and listening in on the conversations that he had with my mother-in-law, I've been able to pick up a lot of this language, and he is now completely fluent in English. So it has been extremely helpful for him. And in turn, because of that, he never graduated from high school in Italy, but he came here to America and graduated with a high school diploma in a year. So that kind of goes along with what my colleagues here were saying, is they're able to, go back, pick up on all of these things so much easier. And he was so afraid of losing his language and losing his culture. And I think that was the biggest issue with him. And I reassured him, we're going to have this bilingual household. We won't have to have that fear of losing his culture. And then later on, we bring in two beautiful little boys, a 2-year-old and a 5-month-old. And before we were married, we talked about if we ever had kids, are we going to raise them bilingual or to be just English speaking in our household? And we had a lot of arguments and conversations with my mother-in-law about her fears in particular of having grandkids that she can't communicate with and be able to tell them that she loves them in Italian and have them understand. And she feared not knowing or being able to speak to them herself. So I said, of course, no. And even though my Italian is very limited, we are going to raise our kids bilingual, and we do. So every day we speak to our children, my husband in Italian and I in English, and then we go back and forth as we need to. And it goes even deeper than just, cultural and being connected with family. It goes into the educational part of it. So I know that being bilingual will benefit them for that. So, of course, as an educator, education is my top priority. And when I was pregnant with my first kid, I did all the research behind it. And I thought it was really cool because I learned that there are so many different benefits to being bilingual and how it affects brain structure over the years. And there's about 3 different aspects that it can affect. So the first being academic. So the academic advantage to being bilingual would be, of course, understanding grammar structure a lot easier because you can start making those connections between grammar and how it is essentially the same in each language. And if it's not, you can figure it out. And then the reading skill. Reading skills have been proven to improve with bilingual students. And then children who speak more than one language, they're actually more likely to have better critical thinking skills and concepts, and they'll be able to think more efficiently and quickly. So that goes in with the math too. They'll be able to pick up on functions so much easier than non-bilingual students could. And the cognitive advantages are excellent problem-solving skills. They're more creative, and funnily enough, it can actually resist the onset of dementia and Alzheimer's in the later years. I thought that was interesting. And it's also shown that research shows that children who are raised in a bilingual home will be able to block out irrelevant information as early as 7 months of age. And to think that my 7-month-old is already critically thinking just because he's being raised bilingual is just fantastic. And so, of course, as a mom, I just want my kids to excel and be the best that they can. I truly believe that being raised in a multicultural home and a multi-language home, they're going to be more sympathetic to the world around them. And I feel like as a culture, we get so immersed in our own communities and our own little culture that we forget other people exist and other dynamics of people exist. So learning another language opens up a child's mind to the fact that there are other ways of life and there are other people in this world bigger than our own communities. And I want my kids to have a strong relationship, not only with their own families, but with people everywhere else. And they can connect somehow to those other people, learn multiple languages on top of the two that we speak. And then, of course, it's also better for me to have an interpreter whenever we go overseas.
Thank you, Ms. Morrow. Thank you very much. All right, we'll now turn it over to Mr. Bishop here. Mr. Bishop, you can go ahead and unmute your, there you go, and we'll speak. You can have your chance, Mr. Bishop. Thank you so much, Mr. Bishop. I know Mr. Bishop because his father was my 7th grade English teacher. And I remember the day that he was born because Mr. Bishop was teaching, and all of a sudden he ran out of the room. He said, "It's time, it's time, it's time." So I guess hours later, and Mr. Benjamin was born. So I know Benjamin all the way from Middleton days. So it's good to actually see you here, Mr. Bishop. Very good family, blessed indeed. So Mr. Bishop, have your way.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you very much for all of the people who've spoken so far. And let me just say, it is wonderful to hear a good Southern accent. Oh my word, it's been so long since I've heard those beautiful monophthongizations, so thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and talk today about how learning other languages helps students to get ahead in both academics and in careers, and I'm going to try to work a little bit of linguistics into that. So I'm a numbers guy, so a lot of the stuff I'm going to say is based purely just in numbers. Sorry, but that's the way it works. Now, the first little thing that I want to mention is a study by Green in 2013 and Dorf in 2019, who cites Green. Now, this essentially was just a study, or these studies, long study short, essentially just said bilinguals are paid more, period. That's looking at it as a microeconomic thing, as well as the fact that bilinguals, when unemployment happens, when laying off happens, bilinguals are less likely by almost 5% to be laid off, which doesn't sound like a lot until you consider how many thousands of jobs that is. We also have that was a study done in Switzerland, as you could likely tell by the names, but we have another study from England that, long story short, once again, people who are bilinguals simply are more often employed. That's from the essentially the Chamber of Commerce of England. In the U.S., Man 2011 said that 2 to 3% more often you are going to be employed, and several times it's not even an important facet of the job for the people to have that bilingual education. It's just that there is a maintained percentage increase regardless as to what job is undertaken. Canada, many bilingual schools, people who have both official languages are 15% more likely to be employed. Again, small percentage, large practical numbers. In ERDAG, bilinguals with L1 support tend to do better, not only in terms of lifetime goals. They are going to have more money coming in from a better job, et cetera, but they're going to have greater mobility. They're going to be able to go different places. When you know a language of a country, you are able to go to that country. Rather straightforward, but statistically speaking, it's extremely significant. It breaks down trade barriers. It makes people able to integrate their work more with others. I think that it's, yes, 45% of companies report that they lost some sort of business transaction because one of their employees did not speak a second language, the particular second language which they needed. Regarding communication difficulties which are experienced by companies, 27% of companies cite a lack of linguistic diversity as one of their greatest problems. 23% list mediocre quality of translation, so people just putting things into Google Translate and pretending that works. 51% listed cultural traditions between countries as being difficult, and 49% listed different workplace norms. Now, those last two are not directly related, it would seem, to the language. But as we've heard so far today, culture is inherent in language. Unless you're doing grammar translation, you cannot teach language, learn language, in any way touch language without having some of that cultural knowledge come along with it. Regarding academics, the British Chamber of Commerce, once again, says that the lack of FLS, that's foreign language support and foreign language learning, affects decisions to locate, and therefore people lose academic opportunities because they can't go to the places that have the greatest language. For example, linguistics. I'll just talk from my own experience. In linguistics, some of the best places to learn are in Eastern Europe. I speak Spanish and English and a little bit of American Sign Language. I don't speak an Eastern European language, so all of those opportunities were not ones which I was afforded. But La Universidad Complutense in Spain, an opportunity for me, and an opportunity for anyone who speaks Spanish. And again, we have those different cultural items. We know that one degree in one area does not mean the same thing as a degree in another one. We know that all of these different cultural items which are inherent in learning are different for different areas, for different languages. Now, and just to talk a little bit about something that's more immediate, high school. Let me find my source here. There we are. Some of the greatest and most well-known colleges and universities actually have different language requirements and things that they ask for regarding languages. For example, at MIT, we have a 2-year language requirement, 2 years of studying some sort of language. At UCLA, 2 years are required and 3 are recommended. The University of Illinois, 2 years. University of Michigan, 2 years are recommended, or 2 years are required, 4 are recommended. And of course we have Harvard, where 4 years of second language learning is highly recommended. Georgia Tech, 2 years required. To list all of these off is going to be interminable, but essentially knowing a second language is going to be a great behoovement to any student who's looking to get into a higher learning, a post-secondary institution of some sort.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bishop. Thank you. All right, we'll now move on over to questions or statements. We'll start with you, Dr. Robinson, if you have a question for the panel, and then we'll open up to our audience.
Great, thank you. And first, let me thank you all for being part of today's panel discussion. I think you provided very excellent information, very timely information, and I really appreciate you taking this opportunity to get involved. And I'll throw this question out to anyone who wishes to get into it. I had a student at the University of South Dakota who did her dissertation work on the bilingual brain and the development of soft skills. And she was able to find that you develop greater soft skills with bilingualism. And it's kind of the social aspects as you spoke of, but also what's actually happening in the brain. A lot of her work came from consulting people at our medical school who actually pointed her to research that said that there's more happening, more synapses going off in the brain of bilingual people than those who are monolingual. By chance, if any of you may have run across that in your research or in your thought processes, or even practical understandings, what are your thoughts on how bilingual skills also aids in soft skill or character development?
Yeah. I'll go ahead and respond to that first. I'm actually, most of my information here is coming directly from a wonderful literature review that was done by, I think that it's just CASEIT.org, and done for some stuff in Canada. But that aside, I'm actually looking right now at the soft skills section of that, and one of the most important facts that I believe that it reveals is that 66% of the world's children are raised on more than one language. Not 100% relevant to your question, but just something that's important to note. Now, getting into that, Looking at the cognitive and social benefits, there are, of course, as we've established, numerous benefits. Let's see, improved sensory processing due to heightened hearing, and can distinguish between different language sounds, tone, pitch. Anyone who has studied Mandarin knows that somebody like me who's a little bit tone deaf has a difference differentiating between a house and a horse. Heightened hearing skills combined with better social skills, increased volume of gray and white matter, improved learning abilities, improved memory, improved executive function, especially with attention to the task and task switching, because of the need to control different mental areas. I actually feel like with you having mentioned that student, I wonder if that student's not cited here. But yes, there are incredible soft skills, and that's in addition to the technical language skills, which we've also discussed today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
That's covered what it
comprehensive.
Pretty much got that one, Doctor. You have another question, Dr. Robinson?
Oh no, I would yield to any questions our students may have who are in the audience.
In here have a particular question that you would like to ask? Any students in here would like to ask questions? All right, stand up, please, Mr. Kelvin. And this is Kelvin, Dr. Robinson. He has a question. Make sure he hears you.
Well, I wanted to ask, because we are talking about races and, what I'm saying, learning different languages at the household, at school and stuff. Well, for a African American student like my parents don't know these languages to teach me. How am I supposed to more?
All right, so the question was, as an African American, learning another language, how can we get our parents, is that right? How can we get our parents to help them learn the language if they don't know the language themselves?
I would like to take part of that anyway. Kelvin's specific question was, how am I supposed to learn it? Not necessarily how are my parents supposed to help me. Knowing that at least 2 credits of a foreign language are required for graduation from any public high school in the state of Tennessee currently. A lot of our students whose parents have graduated or who have older siblings that have graduated have already had some of this exposure. Another aspect of that would be that when we are talking about incorporating a bilingual education, we're not necessarily talking about starting at the 9th grade level in particular, as Mr. Elliott's study is and research. He is backing that this should begin all the way back in kindergarten. So let me pose this question to you then. If you had had multilingual teachers that had begun teaching you Spanish or another language, probably Spanish around here, simply because of our southern geography, and that is where the majority of our needs would be, because most of the second language speaking individuals are speaking Spanish versus, say, French. So if you had had these teachers that had begun teaching you Spanish as early as kindergarten, do you think that the requirement would be there so much for your parents or your other siblings to aid you in the acquisition of that language? Or do you think, since you had been immersed in it since you were very young, that it would be second nature to you? That's right, it would be second nature. And that is exactly the point that we're trying to make. The benefits for you all and society in general, if all students were immersed in that second language from such an early age, would be so great. You wouldn't have to worry about who was going to help you with it, because you just know it. It would just be part of you internally, not like I did, struggling to learn French as a second language when I was a freshman in high school. No, it would already be there, because one of the downfalls of us waiting until you are in high school to learn that second language is so much of your brain is already like set in stone almost. It is so much more complex and complicated to learn that second language at an older age than it is at a younger age. Think about
7002.
think about Go Diego Go. Okay, how many people, y'all are laughing, but y'all know exactly what I'm talking about. Dora the Explorer, Go Diego Go. But these are programs that aided in immersing young children in an introduction to another language. Students struggle less, even though it seems very elementary, even at the high school age. If you were struggling with some of those introductory concepts, you could go back and watch some of those Dora the Explorer and Diego shows to be able to, it wouldn't give you a full grasp of the language, but it would introduce you and link certain concepts that you would need to know to be able to be fluent in that language.
Take the example of my children, the fact that we're teaching them young. That's exactly what we're talking about. The earlier that you are taught, the better you'll be. You're like a little sponge. You know, if you start at the kindergarten level, you haven't even mastered the English language fully. And you're still learning that, so why not take those same concepts that you're learning as you're learning your own language and add another one onto that? It's not going to be as challenging of a task. Like for me, I tried learning Italian in college, and I still can't speak it very well, whereas my children, started at birth, and my 2-year-old maybe cannot speak it yet, but he understands everything you tell him in Italian already. And he is also extremely advanced in speech. Like he speaks in multi-sentences as a 2-year-old, whereas 2-year-olds are still very monosyllabic and don't even speak in full, complete sentences. So there's a huge benefit starting earlier on, not only just in language acquisition, but in your entirety of your education. It will benefit you so much more than if we just continue with the whole monolingual education.
Good question.
That's
It's
a
a really
very
good question.
All right, anybody have another question? Yes, Zoe. Zoe, you have a question. So come up here and speak to Dr. Robinson. Okay, the computer, my dear. Don't be shy. Dr. Robinson won't bite. No, he cannot see you. Okay, loud as you can.
Okay, so you say that it would be better to start learning a foreign language at such a young age, but why is this just now coming up? Why hasn't it been here? Like, why are you guys starting so late?
There are actually several schools that already do it. We're just a little late on the bandwagon. But so, for example, I had a Spanish class when I was in the 2nd grade, and I remember more of my Spanish classes from the 2nd grade than I do from my college Spanish classes. And I just got out of those pretty recently. So that just goes to show you that if you start learning way young, even as early as kindergarten, maybe even earlier, and you start on shows like Go Diego Go or Dora the Explorer, you can soak it up really easy. Now, to explain why it hasn't come to us yet, I really don't know, because it seems like a no-brainer.
I got part of that.
Oh, well, and rural and racial problems is probably part of it for this area. They might have better insight.
One of the reasons is how difficult is it to staff a rural school, period. Now you add on the requirement that they have to be fluent in more than one language. I mean, it's not a very good excuse, but realistically, that's what we're dealing with. I can speak a very little bit of French, but I can teach circles around a lot of people in math. in order to have a class where I could go back and forth between Spanish and English or French and English, even though I can teach circles around people in math, I can teach circles around them in English. I could not speak circles around them in French. See what I'm saying?
What's going on, man?
I think it's very important too, as you talk about why now, why at this stage. There are schools in our nation that start immersion programs very, very early, where you can actually watch kindergartners and first graders and second graders speaking half the language during the day and then a foreign language in the afternoon. We have those kinds of schools set up all over the place. And it makes sense because at those formative years, you may be a little more open to adapting language than you are as an adult, where we learn some of the contradictions in the English language. For example, we were taught I before E except after C, but if you spell but if you spell the word leisure, it contradicts that whole rule. I learned Japanese while I was in college, and today I speak Japanese like a Japanese kindergartner. I haven't had a chance to develop and immerse myself in the language, and I have a lot of habits from the English language that I have to break in order to become totally fluent in Japanese. But it's important that we do start that at an early age, as one of our panelists said. And it's also culturally expanding your worldview to do so. The unfortunate part is, I think globally, we're in this idea of extinguishing language, which in turn extinguishes culture. And that's the absolute wrong way to look at this. When you learn a different language, you begin to open yourself up to appreciating cultures that you've never been in. And you actually look forward to going there one day. I look forward to going to Japan. My friends went in college and did a study abroad, and they learned to speak fluently in about 2 or 3 weeks because you had to. But it made me appreciate everything in the culture of Japan just by learning the language and then getting into cartoons that spoke the language and things like that. But I really wish I would have had that opportunity when I was in maybe first or second grade.
It's a cultural thing too. America thinks we're English speaking. We're the dominant language in the world at this point. We're the language of business. So in America, it's not as important. Whereas where my husband grew up in Otsano de la Emilia, that's where he's from, in his elementary school from like kindergarten up until they graduated, they are required to learn English. And that, I believe, is the reason why he picked up that language so much more quickly. And the only real solution to that would be America starting to put a little bit more importance on, we need to learn some other language, especially Spanish in this area, versus everyone has to learn our language. Because it's like Dr. Robinson said, an extinction. Like everybody needs to be Americanized at this point. And I think that has a lot to do with it too.
Okay. Mr. Bishop, you have something you want to say?
Yes, sir, if I may.
Yes, sir.
And to bring this all kind of together, there's a concept in linguistics called the critical period, which is the most important part of language learning. Now, that's generally attributed to being the youngest stages of human development because we're learning language, but let's kind of parse that apart for a moment. The concept of the critical period is primarily made in order to help us understand that we need things. If something is extremely relevant to us, we're going to learn how to do it. We're going to learn how to parse apart and understand that particular pattern in the same way that I don't need to start a fire every day. But given that, if I were to be out mountaineering, spelunking, what have you, and I need to start a fire, I would eventually have to learn the pattern of events that lead me to that. I need to find sticks. They need to be dry. I need to rub them together in this particular way and have something on which they can catch. In doing that, we look at language as similar to a pattern. Okay? Depends on whether you're Chomsky and whether or not you believe with me, but just ignore that for right now. So, looking at language as a pattern, in English, we tend to not necessarily require any other pattern to get things done from day to day. If I were to suddenly move to, say, Japan or China, or essentially any other language or any other country which is predominantly one language, I would suddenly have to adapt. I would have to recognize that pattern and, in like suit, work with it. And then there's also the concept of identifying with the culture. If I identify more with the culture, then I am more likely to learn the language more. I identify strongly with Latin American culture. I don't identify very strongly with Chinese culture. For those reasons, my Chinese is terrible. My Spanish is a little better. So a lot of different concepts come in to ultimately say, we need to learn language. We learn language that is most relevant to us. And when we are young, we're learning to communicate just because language is something that we need to do. We see the adults doing this. That's how they get these complex things done. So we need to learn that. And as a result of that, that critical period is when we are younger, because we're already learning how to do this pattern recognition and learning how to parse it apart. But again, in America, we don't really need that, for lack of a better way of putting it. We are recognizing now that it's something that we need in order to make business deals go down, in order to make our worldview wider, in order to make ourselves better human beings in general. But it's not something that we've needed for the past however long. And as a result of that, we just sort of let it fall by the wayside. And that's something that's incredible about this program that is proposed, and something that I'm very supportive of in it, is that we're trying to re-centralize that concept of we're humans, we need to talk with other humans. Especially here in Indiana, where we've actually had a recent cut to the funding for bilingual education by, I think it's around $15 million. Yep. So.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you, Mr. Bishop. Well,
yes.
That concludes our panel here today. I want to thank you all very much for being there for us here. Especially you, Mr. Bishop, we wish you all the best. We hope you have a wonderful, terrific holiday coming up. Thank you for taking time out for us. Is there anything else you would like to say, Mr. Bishop, before you exit?
No, sir. Thank you all very much for inviting me, and have a wonderful day, everybody.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. And we want to thank you. If you're interested in being a student at the University of Memphis, a doctoral student, this is the man right here, Dr. Robinson. If you are interested in being a part of the doctoral program, all you have to do is see me. We'll get you registered. We'll get you in there. I know that you all in here. Yes, the doctoral.
We can start you in the fall.
Yes. Start in the fall. All right. So if you're interested in being a doctoral student, please, it's one of the best experiences of my life. Thank you all very much for coming out. God bless you, and we'll see you then. See you later.
Thank you.
Thank you.